Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be tackling FAR transfer tasks today.
Ooh, those are interesting.
I know, right?
Hmm.
Those tricky situations where you can't just rely on step-by-step instructions. Like you need to actually use your brain, make some judgments and stuff.
Definitely. So much more complex than just following a procedure.
Exactly. So we're basing this deep dive on a training session led by Linda. She's like a total rock star in instructional design.
Oh, I've heard of her. She's great.
Yeah, she's amazing. And get this, for this session, she was using Developing Technical Training by Ruth Clark as her guide. That's a classic.
Yeah, a must-read for anyone in our field.
Totally. And what's really cool is that Linda is linking these FAR transfer tasks to AI, which, it makes sense when you think about it. AI is incredible at procedures, but when it comes to nuance and judgment, well, that's where things get really interesting.
It's definitely a hot topic right now, especially with all the crazy advancements in AI.
For sure. So Linda starts off by walking everyone through this matrix from Ruth Clark's book. It breaks down content into 5 types: facts, concepts, processes, procedures, and principles.
Okay, I'm familiar with those.
Cool. So like facts are those little nuggets of info like dates or definitions. Concepts are broader ideas like customer service.
Right, or project management, those big umbrella terms.
Exactly. And processes explain how things work, like photosynthesis or the supply chain. Procedures are like your step-by-step instructions. Think recipes or assembly manuals. And then principles, those are your guiding rules or philosophies, like design principles or ethical guidelines.
Right, the underlying theories that inform how we do things.
Yes. And the matrix also lays out 2 task types: procedures, which are your near transfer tasks.
Or you're basically just applying the steps directly.
Exactly. And then principles, which are those FAR transfer tasks, where you have to apply a broader idea to a brand new situation.
So you can't just rely on rote memorization, you need real understanding.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Linda also stressed that we should be aiming for application, not just remembering stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It's not enough to just know the information, you have to be able to use it.
Right. Like, what's the point of learning something if you can't actually apply it in the real world?
It makes you think about those college exams. All that cramming for nothing.
Yeah, I've been there. So how do we figure out if something's procedural or principle-based? Linda had this fun exercise she did with her group, and I thought we could try it.
Okay, sounds fun.
Awesome. So I'll give you a task, and you tell me if it's more about following a set procedure or applying a broader principle. Ready?
Hit me with it.
All right, first one. Developing a hiring interview. What do you think?
Developing a hiring interview. That's definitely principle-based. You're drawing on your understanding of good interviewing, but there's no one right way to do it.
Okay, good point. It's definitely about adapting to the situation and the candidate.
Right. You got to use your judgment and be flexible, not just ticking boxes.
Okay, you got that one. Let's try a simpler one. How about completing a timesheet?
Completing a timesheet. That's a classic procedure. You're following specific instructions, inputting data, and aiming for consistency.
You're on a roll. Okay, last one. Designing a web page.
Definitely principle-based. There are guidelines, sure, but it's ultimately about making creative choices.
Yeah, and the decisions you make depend on so many factors, like who your audience is, what the purpose of the site is, and the overall brand aesthetic.
So much judgment involved in balancing those factors.
This is fun. Linda's group actually came up with some really cool examples, like things like user journey strategy, conflict de-escalation, even writing an article that will have an impact.
Wow, such a variety. But yeah, it all comes back to that need for judgment and adaptability.
Totally. And that's what makes this whole topic so relevant, especially when we're talking about AI. Machines rock at procedural tasks. But when it comes to FAR transfer, that's where us humans really shine. And Linda even outlined this 4-step process for designing training programs for these tricky skills.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that process.
Well, first she said it's super important to develop valid guidelines. Like do your research, look at best practices, see what's working for high performers. But the key is making sure that these guidelines actually lead to good results on the job.
It's not just about making up a bunch of rules. It's about making sure those rules actually work in the real world.
Exactly. Okay, so you got your guidelines. What's next?
Next up is writing application-level learning objectives. This means making sure your trainees can actually use the guidelines in real situations, not just parrot them back to you on a test.
So bridging the gap between theory and practice.
Exactly.
Okay, guidelines, objectives. What about the actual training itself? How do you design it for these FAR transfer tasks?
Well, Linda talks about choosing the right instructional approach. There are two main options: instructive and inductive.
Instructive and inductive. Can you explain those a bit more?
Sure. Instructive is more direct and rule-based, while inductive is where learners figure out the principles through examples. It's like giving someone a recipe versus having them learn to bake by watching you do it.
Oh, okay. I see the difference. So instructive is giving them the steps, and inductive is more about letting them figure things out.
You got it. And what's really neat is that Linda connected these approaches to machine learning.
Really? How so?
Well, instructive is like supervised learning, where you lay out the rules. Inductive is like unsupervised learning, where the AI is learning from patterns in the data.
Whoa, that's a cool connection. So if we're trying to train people for far transfer tasks, which approach is better? Instructive or inductive?
Well, it depends on the situation, you know? Sometimes you need to start with instructive, especially if things are complex. But to get to that deeper understanding, inductive can be super powerful. It lets learners explore, experiment, and make connections on their own.
So it's like a balance between giving guidance and letting them explore.
Right. But the last part of Linda's process is so important. You have to design the training so that it includes real-world scenarios and practice opportunities. You can't just talk about the principles. They need to actually try them out.
Makes sense. It's like instead of just telling them how to write an impactful article, you give them a scenario where they have to actually do it.
Yes. And you need to have lots of different examples, including some that are not good examples, to help them understand when to apply the guidelines. It's about building up that critical thinking and judgment, not just memorizing rules.
I'm really starting to see how crucial these far transfer tasks are, especially in a world where AI is getting so good at everything else.
It's definitely something to think about. But you know what? I think we should take a little break before we get too deep into that.
Good idea. We'll be right back to continue this fascinating discussion.
You know, before the break, we were talking about practice being so important.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Linda made this point that really stuck with me.
What was that?
She said so many training programs just skip the practice part entirely.
Really?
Like they spend all this time giving information and explaining concepts, but they don't actually give people a chance to apply what they learned.
That's so true, though. It's like, how are you supposed to master something if you never get to actually try it out?
Exactly. And that's where Linda's dog model comes in.
Dog model.
Yeah. She uses it to design practice activities for far transfer training.
Okay, I like it already.
DOGE stands for discriminate, operate, and generate.
Ooh, okay, break that down for me.
So discriminate is about being able to tell the difference between a good example and a bad one.
So like you look at a situation
Yeah.
and you got to decide if the guidelines even apply.
Right. You're developing that judgment.
Like being a detective.
Exactly.
What about operate?
Operate is taking a situation that's not working and figuring out what's wrong and how to fix it using those guidelines.
Like a mechanic for situations.
Exactly.
And generate.
Generate is all about coming up with your own examples or solutions.
So you're not just understanding the ideas.
Right. You're actually using them to create something new.
I love that. So Linda's model is all about active learning and getting better over time.
It's such a good framework.
It makes you think about the future of work, though. Like if AI is taking over all those procedural tasks, what does that leave for us humans?
Yeah, that's the big question everyone's asking. And Linda talked about how machines and humans approach these far transfer tasks so differently.
How so?
Well, machines are amazing at processing tons of data and finding patterns, but they struggle with context.
And nuance.
Yes, humans can understand the specifics of a situation, the emotions involved, all the things machines miss.
It's like they can understand the words, but not the meaning behind them.
Exactly. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in.
Ooh, good point.
Humans are so much better at that.
Yeah.
Reading facial expressions, understanding tone of voice, empathizing.
That's so important for navigating tricky situations.
And for building relationships, making ethical decisions.
Those are all things AI isn't so good at.
Not yet, at least.
What about creativity, though? AI is making art and writing music now.
Right, but I think there's a difference between copying patterns and true originality.
So you're saying AI isn't really creative.
It can be, in a way, but it doesn't have that spark that humans do.
So we've got context, nuance, emotional intelligence, creativity. Those are the human skills that will be super valuable in the future.
Exactly. And those are the skills we need to be developing.
Both in ourselves and in others.
It's about moving beyond just memorizing facts and teaching people how to think critically and work together.
Sounds like we need a whole new approach to education.
We do. It's about helping people become lifelong learners, always curious and ready to adapt.
It's almost like instead of fearing AI, we should be excited about it.
Yeah.
Like it can free us up to focus on what makes us human.
Exactly. AI can handle the boring, repetitive stuff. And we can focus on the things we're good at.
It's a partnership.
A collaboration between humans and machines.
That's where things get really interesting.
But you know what? Before we go too deep into that, I think we need a quick break.
Sounds good. We'll be right back. All right, we're back, and I'm ready to hear more about this human-AI partnership.
Yeah, it's super exciting to think about. But Linda also had some warnings about potential problems, like trying to make everything fit into a procedure, especially with AI.
So not everything can be reduced to a set of rules. Some things just need that human touch.
Exactly. If we try to automate everything and just focus on efficiency, we'll lose what makes us human.
Yeah.
That ability to adapt, be creative, see things in shades of gray, not just black and white.
It's about finding that balance where AI can help us and where we need human judgment.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to what we've been talking about, developing those uniquely human skills, the ones that let us handle complexity and make good decisions when things are uncertain.
So how do we cultivate those skills? I know Linda had some great ideas about that.
She did. One of the biggest things she talked about was continuous learning.
Being a lifelong learner.
Exactly. Staying curious, seeking out new information, being open to changing our minds about things.
So it's not just about school or formal training. Learning should be part of everyday life.
Totally. Take online courses, read books, listen to podcasts. Even just talking to people with different experiences can teach you so much.
Be a sponge. Soak it all up.
I love that. And of course, practice is crucial, like we talked about. But how do we make that practice really effective?
Yeah, good question.
Well, Linda's a big believer in deliberate practice. You have to be intentional and focused on getting better.
Not just doing the same thing over and over again.
Right. You need to figure out your weaknesses and work on those specifically.
Like an athlete training for the Olympics. They break things down and work on each part.
Exactly. And just like athletes need coaches, we can all benefit from mentors or even friends who can give us feedback.
Okay, continuous learning, deliberate practice, anything else.
Oh, and seeking out diverse experiences.
Getting out of our comfort zones.
Yes. Trying new things, meeting people from different backgrounds, expand your horizons.
It sounds like it's all about being proactive.
Yeah.
Taking charge of our own growth.
Absolutely. And remembering that developing these skills takes time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You'll have setbacks, but you just got to keep learning and growing.
So well said. This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I'm really starting to grasp how important far transfer tasks are, especially with AI becoming so prevalent.
Me too. It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into far transfer tasks and their connection to AI. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and keep diving deep.